Captain Maya Rodriguez had crash-landed in worse places, but Kepler Station definitely made her top 10 list of places I'd rather not bleed out. The medical bay's stark white walls were doing that annoying thing where they kept swimming in and out of focus, which probably meant she had a concussion. Or maybe it was just the smell of antiseptic mixed with what she could only describe as ode to condescending alien. Dr. Vex Thornquill stood over her examination table like a disapproving praying mantis that had learned to wear a lab coat. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the medical lights as he examined her charts with the kind of disdain usually reserved for expired milk. "A human," he said, managing to make the word sound like a particularly distasteful diagnosis. "I suppose we'll have to make do with basic life support until we can arrange transport elsewhere." Maya tried to sit up, immediately regretted the decision, and settled for glaring at him horizontally. "Gee, Doc, don't strain yourself with the bedside manner." Vex's compound eyes clicked disapprovingly. "Nurse Glimmerwing, place the specimen in Quarantine Bay 3. Standard isolation protocols. We can't risk contamination." Pip Glimmerwing, who looked like someone had crossed a hummingbird with a very anxious teenager, fluttered her iridescent wings nervously. "But sir, her injuries are the result of primitive human engineering and equally primitive human medicine," Vex interrupted. "Their bodies are crude, inefficient biological machines. We'll monitor her vital signs and ensure she doesn't expire messily, but I won't waste our advanced medical resources on someone whose species still uses chemotherapy." Maya let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Chemotherapy? Buddy, we figured out better cancer treatments 2 centuries ago. Maybe update your Wikipedia page before you start throwing shade." The doctor's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Wikipedia? I'm not familiar with that medical journal." It's not. Maya started, then decided she didn't have enough blood left to explain the internet to an alien supremacist. "Never mind. Just patch me up so I can get out of your pristine medical wonderland." Kepler Station was known throughout the galaxy as the premier medical research facility, a gleaming monument to alien medical superiority. Dr. N2. Vex Thornquill had built his reputation on treating the most exotic alien diseases with cutting-edge technology that made human medicine look like leeches and bloodletting. He'd written 3 books on primitive species medical practices, and frequently lectured at conferences about the amusing inefficiencies of less advanced civilizations. Humans, in his professional opinion, were barely above the level of trained animals who'd stumbled onto space travel by accident. Pip guided the floating gurney toward Quarantine, stealing worried glances at her patient. Maya's skin was pale and clammy, and there was definitely more blood on her flight suit than seemed advisable for continued consciousness. "Don't worry," Maya muttered as they moved through the corridors. "I've survived worse than a pompous bug doctor's wounded ego." "The doctor is very skilled," Pip said quietly, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as Maya. "He's treated dozens of species, won the Galactic Medical Excellence Award 3 years running." "Let me guess," Maya said, watching the ceiling panels drift by. "None of those species were human." Pip's silence was answer enough. The quarantine bay was small, sterile, and equipped with monitoring equipment that looked impressive but seemed designed for beings with significantly different biology than Maya's. She watched Pip fuss with the alien medical scanners, clearly out of her depth when it came to human physiology. "You know," Maya said conversationally, "where I come from, when someone's bleeding internally, we usually try to do something about it before they bleed externally instead." Pip's feathers ruffled with anxiety. Dr. Thornquill said to monitor and observe. "He's reviewing human medical data to determine the best course of action." "Human medical data from when? The Renaissance?" Through the quarantine bay's transparent walls, Maya could see Dr. Thornquill in his office, presumably reading whatever outdated information the station's database had on human medicine. Given his attitude, she suspected it wasn't the most current edition. She closed her eyes and tried to ignore the growing pain in her side. She'd been in worse scrapes than this, survived things that should have killed her, and lived to make sarcastic comments about it afterward. But something told her that Dr. Vex Thornquill was going to be a bigger obstacle to her recovery than any of her actual injuries. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd crashed on the most advanced medical station in the known galaxy, and she was probably going to die because the chief medical officer thought humans were too primitive to bother saving. Typical Tuesday, she muttered to herself as the monitors beeped ominously around her. Dr. Vex Thornquill swept into the quarantine bay the next morning like a lecturer approaching a podium, his entourage of medical residents trailing behind him like anxious ducklings. Maya had spent the night listening to alien medical equipment beep at her in languages she didn't understand, which had done wonders for her already stellar mood. "Observe," Vex announced to his audience, gesturing at Maya with one of his forearms while consulting a holographic display with another. The human specimen exhibits classic signs of what their primitive medicine calls internal bleeding. In more advanced species, we would have addressed this immediately with cellular regeneration therapy or nanosurgical intervention. Maya cracked one eye open. "Specimen? I'm lying right here, Doc. The traditional term is patient, but I'd settle for that annoying human who won't shut up." Vex continued as if she hadn't spoken. However, human physiology is remarkably crude. Their healing mechanisms are slow, inefficient, and prone to infection. Their immune systems are overactive and frequently attack their own bodies. Frankly, it's a miracle their species survived long enough to develop space travel. One of the residents, a young reptilian with bright blue scales, raised a webbed hand. "Sir, shouldn't we at least stabilize her condition? Her blood pressure readings are—" "Dr. Brightscale," Vex interrupted sharply. "Human blood pressure operates on entirely different parameters than civilized species. What appears critical to us may be perfectly normal for them. We cannot apply advanced medical standards to primitive biology." Maya tried to sit up, managed about 15 degrees before her vision went spotty, and settled for a withering glare. "You know, I hate to interrupt this fascinating lecture on how terrible my biology is, but I'm pretty sure bleeding to death transcends species barriers." Dr. Zara Brightscale, the young medic who'd asked the question, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "But sir, surely basic trauma care principles are irrelevant when dealing with a species that still practices surgical procedures with metal knives," Vex said dismissively. "Their medicine is barbaric, Dr. Brightscale. They cut people open with sharp objects, poison cancer patients with toxic chemicals, and somehow believe that jabbing needles into people will prevent disease. It's medieval." "Vaccines," Maya said weakly. "They're called vaccines, and they work pretty well. Also, those metal knives you mentioned. They're called scalpels, and fun fact, even your fancy alien medicine still uses them, because sometimes you need to cut things open to fix them." Vex's mandibles clicked irritably. "Nurse Glimmerwing, increase the sedation. The specimen is becoming agitated." Pip, who had been hovering nervously at the edge of the group, wrung her small hands together. "Sir, I don't think we should sedate her further. Her respiration is already shallow, and human metabolism processes sedatives differently than—" "Than civilized species, yes," Vex finished. "Which is precisely why we must be cautious. We'll monitor her vital signs and allow her primitive healing mechanisms to function naturally. It's not our place to interfere with evolutionary processes, however inefficient they may be." Maya stared at him. "Did you just basically say you're going to let me die because my healing factor isn't up to your standards?" "I'm saying we'll provide appropriate care for your species' limitations," Vex replied coldly. "If those limitations prove insurmountable, then that's simply the natural order asserting itself." Dr. Brightscale stepped forward, her voice carefully controlled. "With respect, sir, our medical oath was written for sentient beings capable of benefiting from advanced medical intervention." Vex cut her off. "Not for creatures whose idea of surgery involves stopping the heart and manually manipulating organs with their bare hands. "It's called cardiac surgery," Maya muttered, "and we wear gloves." As the group prepared to leave, Maya caught Dr. Brightscale's eye. The young medic looked troubled, glancing back at the monitors displaying Maya's deteriorating vital signs. After they'd gone, Pip remained behind, fidgeting with the medical equipment and stealing worried glances at her patient. "He's not always like this," Pip said quietly, though she didn't sound convinced. "Dr. Thornquill is usually very dedicated to his patients." "Just not the primitive ones?" Maya asked. Pip's silence spoke volumes. Maya watched the nurse check and recheck the monitoring equipment, clearly wanting to do more but bound by her superior's orders. The pain in her side was getting worse, and she could feel her strength ebbing away like water through a sieve. "You know," Maya said conversationally, "where I come from, we have a saying about doctors like yours. The operation was a success, but the patient died." Pip looked confused. "But that doesn't make sense. How can it be successful if—" "That's the point," Maya interrupted. "Sometimes being technically right isn't the same thing as being actually helpful." As Pip bustled around the quarantine bay, Maya couldn't help but notice the nurse's growing agitation. Whatever the alien medical scanners were telling her, it wasn't good news. Maya closed her eyes and tried to think positive thoughts. She'd survived a Martian plague that had killed half her crew, walked away from a shuttle crash that should have liquefied her internal organs, and once spent 3 weeks in a coma that doctors said she'd never wake up from. But those had been human doctors, working with human medicine, treating human biology. Here she was just an inconvenient specimen whose primitive healing mechanisms weren't worth the effort of advanced medical intervention. "Typical," she whispered to herself as the monitors continued their ominous beeping. "I survive everything the universe throws at me, only to die because of medical snobbery." Pip Glimmerwing had never been particularly good at following orders she disagreed with, which was probably why she'd never risen beyond the rank of senior nurse despite 15 years of service. Tonight, as she watched Maya Rodriguez's vital signs continue their slow decline, she decided that insubordination was a small price to pay for keeping someone alive. "I'm just going to run some basic blood work," she muttered to herself as she prepared the sampling equipment. Standard procedure. Nothing fancy. Definitely not providing medical care to a primitive specimen. Maya was unconscious, which made the process easier and somehow more heartbreaking at the same time. Up close, the human looked surprisingly young despite the laugh lines around her eyes and the silver threading through her dark hair. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and her skin had that waxy pallor that Pip recognized from too many patients in their final hours. The blood draw was routine, though human blood looked oddly red compared to the blue, green, and purple variety she was used to handling. She labeled the samples carefully and fed them into the automated analysis system, requesting the most comprehensive workup available. While the machines hummed and whirred through their diagnostic routines, Pip found herself checking and rechecking Maya's IV lines, adjusting the monitors, and performing all the small acts of care that Dr. Thornquill had specifically forbidden. It wasn't advanced medical intervention, she told herself. It was basic maintenance. The analysis results came back an hour later, and Pip nearly dropped her tablet when she saw them. "That can't be right," she whispered, staring at the display. According to the blood work, Maya Rodriguez was a walking medical impossibility. Her antibody profile showed markers for diseases that shouldn't exist simultaneously in a living being. She had immunity markers for Rigelian bone rot, Centauri neural fever, and half a dozen other exotic diseases that most aliens never survived, let alone humans who supposedly had primitive immune systems. More puzzling still, her blood chemistry showed signs of having been exposed to radiation levels that should have been immediately fatal, to heavy metal poisoning that should have shut down her organs, and toxins that most species couldn't even pronounce, let alone survive. Pip ran the analysis again, certain there had been some kind of equipment malfunction. The results were identical. She was still staring at the impossible data when Maya stirred and opened her eyes. "Hey there, Angel Wings," Maya said weakly. "Please tell me you've got good news and maybe some painkillers." Pip clutched her tablet to her chest. I ran some blood work." "And?" "Oh, and?" "Your antibody profile is unusual." Maya managed a weak chuckle. That's one way to put it. "What did you find?" "Let me guess, my primitive human blood isn't up to your station standards." "Actually," Pip said slowly, "it's the opposite. According to these results, you've been exposed to diseases that should have killed you multiple times. Your immune system has markers for pathogens that most medical professionals only read about in textbooks." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Huh, that's new." "New? You mean you didn't know?" "Well, I knew I'd been sick a few times. Occupational hazard of being a deep space pilot. You pick up weird bugs on alien worlds." Maya paused, studying Pip's expression. "This is about more than a few space colds, isn't it?" Pip consulted her tablet again, as if the data might have changed in the last 30 seconds. "You have immunity markers for vegan hemorrhagic fever. The mortality rate for that disease is 98%. For humans, it should be 100%. "Oh, that," Maya said casually. "Yeah, that was a rough couple of weeks. Picked it up on a supply run to New Vegas colony. Thought it was just a bad case of food poisoning until I started bleeding from my eyes." Pip's feathers went completely white. "You survived vegan hemorrhagic fever and thought it was food poisoning?" "To be fair, the symptoms started out pretty similar. Besides, I've always been tough to kill. My grandmother used to say I was too stubborn to die properly." "But that's not—" Pip stopped herself, staring at the blood work results again. "How many times have you been seriously ill?" Maya thought about it. Define seriously. Life-threatening diseases. Conditions that required hospitalization. This year or in general? Pip's voice went up an octave. "This year?" "Kidding," Maya said with a grin that was probably meant to be reassuring and completely failed. "Let's see, there was the vegan thing you mentioned. That weird neural parasite I picked up in the Horsehead Nebula. Something the doctors called impossible space plague that I caught from a derelict ship near Alpha Centauri." "Impossible space plague is a myth," Pip interrupted. "It's a hypothetical disease that epidemiologists use in worst-case scenario models. It doesn't actually exist." "Tell that to the 3 weeks I spent in quarantine on Earth Station 1, Maya replied. "Though to be honest, the worst part wasn't the disease. It was the dietary restrictions afterward. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find decent tacos when your immune system is rebuilding itself?" Pip looked down at her tablet, then back at Maya, then at the tablet again. "Your blood work shows exposure to toxins that would kill most beings in minutes. Radiation levels that would sterilize entire planets. Biological agents that exist only in the most secure research laboratories in the galaxy." Maya shrugged, which was probably not the appropriate response to discovering you were a walking violation of several laws of biology. "I've always been lucky, I guess. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I mean, most people never get exposed to this stuff in the first place." "This isn't luck," Pip said slowly. I don't know what this is. I need to show this to Dr. Thornquill." "The bug who thinks I'm too primitive to waste medicine on?" Maya asked. "Yeah, that should be a fun conversation. Hey doc, remember that worthless human specimen? Turns out she survived diseases that would make your worst nightmares look like a mild head cold." Pip stared at the blood work results one more time, then at the human who was discussing potentially species-ending diseases like they were minor inconveniences. "What else haven't you told us about your medical history?" she asked weakly. Maya grinned. Well, there was that time on Kepler 442 billion when I accidentally drank reactor coolant, but that's probably not relevant to current medical treatment. Pip clutched her tablet tighter and wondered if there was a protocol for dealing with patients who were apparently immune to everything that should have killed them. Somehow, Mimkane, she doubted Dr. Thornquill had covered this in his lectures on primitive human medicine. The first sign something was wrong came at 0347 station time, then when Dr. Brightscale collapsed during her rounds in the xenobiology wing. By 0400, 3 more medical staff members were down with identical symptoms: sudden onset fever, respiratory distress, and a distinctive purple rash that spread across their skin like spilled ink. By 0500, half the medical staff was unconscious. Dr. Vex Thornquill, who had been awakened from his sleep cycle by emergency alerts, stood in the main medical bay watching his carefully ordered world fall apart around him. His compound eyes tracked the chaos as nurses and doctors who had been perfectly healthy 12 hours ago were wheeled in on gurneys, their bodies racked with seizures. "Status report," he demanded, his voice strained as he fought off his own growing symptoms. Dr. Kesh Ironscale, one of the few remaining conscious medical staff, consulted his rapidly multiplying list of patients. 47 staff members affected so far, sir. Symptoms are consistent across all species: fever, respiratory failure, neural disruption, and progressive organ shutdown. Whatever this is, it doesn't discriminate. Vex's mandibles clicked weakly. The purple rash was beginning to spread across his exoskeleton, and he could feel his coordination starting to deteriorate. Cause? Well known. It appeared simultaneously across multiple sections of the station, which suggests either atmosphere contamination or, Kesh paused, his voice growing weaker, or something waterborne that affects our universal life support systems. Another alarm blared as the intensive care unit reached capacity. "Treatment options?" Vex asked, though he could already feel his own strength ebbing. "We've tried everything in our medical database. Broad-spectrum antivirals, bacterial inhibitors, parasitic suppressants, even experimental nanotherapy. Nothing's working. Sir, I think." Dr. Kesh collapsed mid-sentence, his scaled body hitting the deck with a sickening thud. Vex looked around the medical bay that had been his pride and joy. The most advanced medical facility in known space was being brought to its knees by an unknown pathogen, and his superior alien medical technology was proving useless. In the distance, he could hear Pip Glimmerwing's voice over the comm system, and with growing horror, he realized she was the only medical staff member still conscious. "This is Nurse Glimmerwing to all stations." Pip's voice crackled through the speakers, high-pitched with panic. "I need any remaining medical personnel to report to Medical Bay 1 immediately. We have a station-wide medical emergency, and I'm the only one left standing." Vex stumbled toward the quarantine bay, his vision blurring as the disease progressed through his system. Through the transparent walls, he could see the human Maya Rodriguez sitting up in her bed, looking weak but distinctly alive and conscious. She caught sight of him through the glass and raised an eyebrow. "You look terrible, Doc. Rough night?" The station, Vex managed, his speech slurring as motor control became increasingly difficult. "Medical emergency. Unknown pathogen. Everyone's dying?" Maya finished. "Yeah, I can hear the alarms. Also, you've got that distinctive purple rash thing going on. Very fetching, by the way. Really brings out your eyes." Even in his deteriorating condition, Vex felt a flicker of his old arrogance. Human medicine, he wheezed, couldn't possibly understand alien pathology. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then at the chaos visible through the medical bay windows, where Pip was frantically trying to stabilize multiple patients simultaneously. "You know what, Doc?" Maya said, swinging her legs over the side of her bed and standing up with obvious effort. "You're absolutely right. Human medicine probably can't understand alien pathology." Vex felt a moment of vindication, even as his legs gave out and he slumped against the wall. On the other hand, Maya continued conversationally, I've been exposed to more alien diseases than most aliens, survived things that should have killed me, and I'm currently the only person on this station who isn't turning purple and bleeding from their orifices. She moved to the quarantine bay door and examined the lock mechanism. So here's what's going to happen, Bug Boy. You're going to unlock this door, and I'm going to see if this primitive human can figure out what's killing everyone before your superior alien medical technology kills you all through sheer incompetence. Impossible, Vex whispered, though his protest lacked conviction. You're injured, primitive. Yeah, well, Maya said, working on the door lock with medical instruments she'd MacGyvered into lockpicks. I'm also the only medical professional on this station who isn't currently dying. So unless you've got a better plan, I suggest you start thinking of me as less primitive specimen and more your last hope. The quarantine door hissed open, and Maya Rodriguez stepped out into the medical bay chaos. Pip. She called to the frantically working nurse. I need a medical tricorder, a full station atmospheric analysis, and whatever passes for coffee around here. We've got work to do. Behind her, Dr. Vex Thornquill slid down the wall to sit on the floor, his vision fading as he watched the primitive human take charge of his medical station. The irony was not lost on him, even as consciousness slipped away. The human he'd deemed too primitive to treat was now the only hope for saving everyone he'd considered medically superior.
Typical Tuesday, Maya muttered as she grabbed medical equipment and began her own analysis of the spreading plague.
Maya Rodriguez stood in the center of Kepler Station's main medical bay, surrounded by unconscious aliens and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Her own injuries still throbbed with every movement, but adrenaline and spite were proving to be excellent painkillers. All right, Pip, she said, examining a blood sample under a microscope while simultaneously monitoring 3 different patients. Talk to me about your environmental systems. What's your water recycling process? Pip, who was the only other conscious being on the station and looked like she was about 3 minutes away from a complete nervous breakdown, consulted her tablet with trembling hands. Standard tri-filter system with biomolecular screening and quantum purification. It's completely state-of-the-art, impossible for contaminants too. Impossible, huh? Maya interrupted, adjusting the microscope settings. You know what I've learned about impossible things? They happen anyway, usually on Tuesdays and always when you're least prepared for them. She peered into the microscope eyepiece and let out a low whistle. Well, hello there, you little bastard. What is it? Pip asked, hovering anxiously at her shoulder. Something that shouldn't exist but clearly does, Maya replied, stepping back from the microscope. Take a look. Pip examined the sample and gasped. That's not in any of our medical databases. Of course it's not. Your databases probably don't include information about diseases that only affect spacefaring species, but because your brilliant medical establishment assumes that if they haven't cataloged it, it doesn't exist. Maya moved to another workstation and began running chemical analysis on blood samples from multiple species. This little beauty is what we humans would call a hybrid pathogen, part virus, part bacteria, part something I can't identify but definitely don't like. It's specifically designed to target the commonalities between different alien species biology. But that's impossible, Pip protested. Different species have completely different physiologies. There's no common biological target that could. Except there is, Maya said, pulling up holographic displays of alien anatomy. You all use the same basic life support systems on space stations, same artificial atmosphere composition, same recycled water, same processed food. Over time, spacefaring species develop similar biological adaptations to artificial environments. She gestured at the data streams flowing across the screens. This pathogen is targeting those adaptations. It's essentially a disease that only affects beings who've adapted to living in artificial environments. Pip's feathers went completely white. That's brilliant. And horrible. Yeah, well, whoever designed this thing knew their biology, Maya said grimly. Good news is, I think I know how to stop it. Bad news is, the cure is going to offend every medical principle your people hold dear. She moved to a medical fabrication unit and began programming it to synthesize specific compounds. See, the thing about human medicine is that we've always been sneaky little bastards. We can't regenerate limbs like some species or survive in vacuum like others, so we got really good at fighting dirty. What do you mean?
Maya grinned, and it wasn't entirely reassuring. I mean, we learned how to turn our own biology into a weapon. Remember those impossible diseases I survived? My immune system didn't just beat them, it learned from them. My blood contains antibodies for pathogens that most species consider mythical.
She drew several vials of her own blood, ignoring Pip's protests about her already weakened condition. Human blood is a cocktail of everything nasty we've encountered and survived. Most advanced species would consider it contaminated and toxic. That's exactly what Dr. Thornquill said about human biology, Pip realized. And he was right from his perspective, Maya acknowledged, feeding her blood samples into the fabrication unit. The difference is, I'm about to turn those contaminations into a cure. But she worked quickly, synthesizing a treatment based on human antibodies modified to work with alien physiology. It was crude by Kepler station standards, but it was also something their advanced medical systems had never considered, using primitive biology as a template for fighting diseases that advanced medicine couldn't touch. This is completely against medical protocol, Pip said weakly as Maya prepared the first doses. Yeah, well, your medical protocol is what got everyone into this mess, Maya replied, loading the treatment into a hypospray. Sometimes you need to fight advanced problems with primitive solutions. She administered the first dose to Dr. Brightscale, who had been unconscious for hours. Within minutes, the young medic's purple rash began to fade, and her breathing stabilized. It's working, Pip breathed. Of course it's working, Maya said, moving on to the next patient. Human medicine might be primitive, but we've had thousands of years to perfect the art of not dying from things that should kill us. As they worked their way through the medical bay, treating patient after patient with Maya's improvised cure, Pip couldn't help but marvel at the irony. Dr. Thornquill is going to be so embarrassed when he wakes up, she said. Maya paused in her work and looked down at the unconscious chief medical officer, whose purple rash was already beginning to fade under the influence of primitive human antibodies. You know what the funny thing is? Maya said thoughtfully. He was right about human medicine being crude and primitive. The difference is, he thought, that made it useless. She administered the treatment to Dr. Thornquill with perhaps slightly more force than medically necessary.
Turns out sometimes crude and primitive is exactly what you need to solve problems that advanced and sophisticated can't touch.
As the medical bay slowly filled with conscious, recovering aliens, Maya couldn't help but smile.
Besides, she added, where I come from, we have a saying, if it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. Dr. Thornquill's compound eyes fluttered open just in time to hear her final observation. And human medicine? It definitely works. Dr. Vex Thornquill regained consciousness to find himself staring at the ceiling of his own medical bay, which was both familiar and profoundly disorienting. The last thing he remembered was collapsing while watching the primitive human escape from quarantine. Now, his compound eyes were clear, his breathing was normal, and the purple rash that had been spreading across his exoskeleton was gone. Ah, good, came a sardonic voice from nearby. Sleeping Beauty awakens? Vex turned his head to see Maya Rodriguez sitting in a chair beside his bed, looking pale and tired but distinctly alive. She was reviewing medical charts on a tablet with the casual competence of someone who belonged in a medical facility. You? He said weakly. Me, Maya confirmed cheerfully. Surprise. The primitive human saved your advanced alien ass. The memories came flooding back, the station-wide plague, his staff collapsing one by one, the human somehow being the only one unaffected. Vex struggled to sit up, his pride warring with his growing realization of what must have happened. The pathogen he managed. Defeated, Maya said, consulting her charts. Turns out sometimes you need primitive solutions for advanced problems. Who would have thought? Dr. Brightscale approached from across the medical bay, moving with the careful gait of someone recently recovered from a serious illness. Dr. Thornquill, I'm glad to see you're conscious. Captain Rodriguez saved the station. Her treatment protocol was unconventional, but remarkably effective. Vex looked around the medical bay, taking in the sight of his staff moving about their duties, alive and healthy. Nurse, glimmering, fluttered past with the medical cart, giving him a cheerful wave that somehow managed to convey both relief and a subtle hint of "I told you so." How? Vex asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Maya held up a vial of reddish liquid. Primitive human blood full of all those contaminations and inefficiencies you mentioned. Turns out my immune system's collection of impossible diseases made for a pretty effective treatment base. That's not possible, Vex said automatically, then stopped himself. Given the evidence of his own recovery, it was clearly very possible indeed. You know what's funny? Maya continued conversationally. The pathogen was specifically designed to target space-adapted physiology. It was counting on victims having clean, efficient, optimized immune systems, the kind of superior biology you're so proud of. She gestured at herself with obvious amusement. But human immune systems aren't clean or efficient. We're walking disaster zones of biological contamination, carrying antibodies for diseases that shouldn't exist and toxin resistances that make no evolutionary sense. Dr. Brightscale nodded enthusiastically. The pathogen couldn't adapt to Captain Rodriguez's antibody profile because it was unlike anything in our medical databases. Her immune system was essentially speaking a completely different biological language. So, my primitive medicine worked because it was too primitive for the disease to understand. Vex asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his wounded pride. Exactly, Maya said with a grin. Sometimes the best defense against advanced threats is aggressively primitive solutions. Vex was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. His entire career had been built on the assumption that more advanced medicine was inherently superior to primitive alternatives. The idea that crude, inefficient human biology could succeed where his sophisticated treatments failed was humbling. I owe you an apology, he said finally. Maya raised an eyebrow. Just one? Perhaps several, Vex admitted. My prejudices about human medicine nearly cost everyone on this station their lives. Yeah, well, Maya said, standing up with obvious effort next time, maybe don't dismiss an entire species' medical knowledge just because it doesn't match your textbooks. She moved toward the medical bay exit, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Doc, you might want to update your databases. Human medicine has come a long way since whatever medieval nonsense you've been reading. Dr. Brightscale stepped forward. Captain, before you go, we'd like to offer you a position in our medical exchange program. Your approach to treatment could revolutionize how we handle unknown pathogens. Maya considered this, glancing around the medical bay that had nearly been her tomb just days earlier. You know what? That actually sounds interesting. I've always wanted to see what would happen if you combined human stubbornness with alien technology. It would be an honor to have you, Dr. Brightscale said sincerely. Vex cleared his throat. Captain Rodriguez, despite our initial difficulties, I would be very interested in learning more about human medical practices. Perhaps we could arrange some collaborative research. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. Sure, Doc. But fair warning, human medicine involves a lot of improvisation, rule breaking, and what you'll probably consider reckless disregard for proper protocol.
After this experience, Vex said thoughtfully, I'm beginning to think proper protocol might be overrated.
As Maya gathered her belongings and prepared for transfer to a human medical facility for her own recovery, she couldn't help but reflect on the cosmic joke of it all. She'd crash-landed on the most advanced medical station in the galaxy, been dismissed as too primitive to treat, nearly died from medical neglect, and then ended up saving everyone with the very crude biology they'd scorned. You know, she said to Pip, who was helping her pack. There's definitely a lesson here about not judging a book by its cover. Pip's feathers rustled with amusement, or not judging a species by its medical practices. That too, Maya paused at the medical bay entrance and looked back at the bustling facility. Dr. Thornquill was already deep in conversation with his staff about revising their treatment protocols, while Dr. Brightscale was excitedly taking notes on everything Maya had done. The transport shuttle that would take her to the nearest human medical facility was waiting in the docking bay, but Maya found herself oddly reluctant to leave. For all the drama and near-death experiences, Kepler Station had taught her something valuable too. "Hey, Doc," she called to Vex, who looked up from his medical charts. "Just so we're clear, your technology really is impressive. The problem wasn't your equipment or your knowledge. It was your assumptions." Vex's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "And what assumptions would those be?" "That advanced automatically means better," Maya said. "Sometimes the old ways work precisely because they're old. We've had time to test them against everything the universe could throw at us." She grinned and headed toward the door. "Besides, there's something to be said for medical practices developed by a species too stubborn to die properly." As the doors closed behind her, Maya could hear Dr. Thornquill addressing his staff. "It appears we have much to learn about the intersection of primitive and advanced medicine. Dr. Brightscale, please begin compiling a comprehensive database of human medical practices. It seems our previous sources were inadequate." The shuttle ride to the human medical facility was peaceful, giving Maya time to process everything that had happened. She'd gone from being an unwanted specimen to the station's unlikely savior, all because her primitive immune system was too chaotic for an advanced pathogen to understand. 3 weeks later, she received a message from Kepler Station. The medical exchange program was officially approved, and they were requesting her input on developing new treatment protocols that combined human adaptability with alien technology. The message was signed by Dr. Vex Thornquill, Chief Medical Officer, and, according to his new title, Director of Interspecies Medical Research. Maya laughed as she dictated her reply. "I'll be happy to help, Doc. Just remember, human medicine works best when you throw the rulebook out the airlock and improvise. Hope you're ready for that." She paused, then added with characteristic sarcasm, "Oh, and next time a primitive human crashes on your station, maybe try treating them before they have to save everyone. Just a thought." As she sent the message, Maya couldn't help but smile. The galaxy was full of advanced civilizations with sophisticated technology and superior attitudes. But sometimes what they really needed was a stubborn human with a chaotic immune system and a complete disregard for proper medical protocol. After all, the best medicine wasn't always the most advanced medicine. Sometimes it was just the medicine that actually worked. And if there was one thing humans had always been good at, it was finding ways to work when everything else failed. "Typical Tuesday," Maya muttered to herself as she settled in for her own recovery, already planning her return to Kepler Station and looking forward to teaching some very advanced aliens about the beautiful, chaotic art of primitive human medicine. The universe, she reflected, had a wonderful sense of irony, and she was just primitive enough to appreciate it.